hand it over to Mike.
All righty. Thank you, Amy June. I trust that you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, obviously great to see so many familiar faces. So that's always a nice thing for me, and I assume for everybody else as well. So this, I'm actually surprised that there's so many familiar faces, because I've been giving a version of this presentation for almost a year now. So it's in its swan song. I think today and tomorrow at GovCon will be the last 2 times that I give this presentation. Maybe June twisted my arm and is forcing me to change it for BadCamp quite a bit. So I decided it's time to retire it. But anyway, what I'm going to talk about is basically the newish core Composer template. Those of you that know me and have seen me present or seen me teach, feel free to interrupt me anytime. Actually, let me get the chat window open. I will answer questions whenever. More than happy to be derailed by that. Okay, there we go. Now I have the chat window where I can see it. So I'm going to kind of go pretty quickly through the first few slides, which are basically setting the table of why Composer is so important. I'm happy to slow down. If anybody feels the need for me to go slower, just let me know. And I should probably go slower just for the captioning, because I'm going to enunciate every word. If you want to check out a copy of these slides, there is the URL. So a lot of times when I present or when I teach, I like to start off by like making the case for why what I'm about to tell you matters. Case in point is when a lot of us started using Drupal 8, there was the option to use Composer to add modules and do stuff like that, but it wasn't super required. And I know at least for me, it took a while to be convinced that I needed Composer. But then the more I've learned about Composer and the more that Drupal 8 and the community has evolved, now it's, there's no question in my mind that we should all be using Composer. So let's start by not talking about Drupal for a minute or two and just talk about like a very simple, command line PHP project that we wanted to do a couple things. Maybe we wanted to send out emails. We wanted to be able to read and write YAML files. We could write all of that functionality by hand. We could open up a text editor and just, open up the PHP documentation site and just go to town using the raw PHP mail function and all that stuff. And that would take us probably a while to get something really robust and flexible and secure and maintainable and all those good things. Or since we kind of live in an open source world, we're all PHP, for the most part, we live in a PHP world, being Drupalists. We could go and find some open source code and include that as part of our project, and then just call classes and methods within that project, within our project. An example of that would be something like SwiftMailer for sending out emails, and the YAML component for reading and writing YAML files. And if you only have 2 dependencies, it's not that bad. You can keep track of it. Like today, if we're writing our project today and there's, version 5.4.12 of SwiftMailer, we're going to write to that API. But the problem is that tomorrow there might be version 6 of SwiftMailer. And that might have brand new APIs that breaks our project. So we would need to manually keep track of, well, version 1 of my project works with this specific version of this dependency and this specific version of that dependency. And the problem just kind of snowballs from there, because even things like SwiftMailer and the YAML component, they have their own dependencies. And those dependencies have their own release schedule. So even with 2 direct dependencies, keeping track of versions starts becoming, quite tedious. Yeah, I think I said all this stuff, so we're just going to keep on going. Another thing we have to watch out for is, 3 months ago, we may have added SwiftMailer and, gotten its dependencies as well. But then tomorrow, we're going to add some other dependency. And we would have to be on top of things enough and paying enough attention to make sure that we're not adding a subdependency that conflicts with another subdependency. So there's all these things we have to keep track of, a lot of them having to do with versioning as well. And keeping all of these dependencies in line, as well as checking for conflicts, is challenging / tedious / work that nobody wants to do. Especially when you have a code base like Drupal that has dozens of direct dependencies and way more indirect dependencies. And as someone who a lot of us know, Ryan from Commerce Guys, he was talking about Composer once in presentation, and he said, as humans, we are the worst people for that job because we are not dependable. We are horrible dependency managers. And that's really what Composer does for us. We tell Composer that we want, the latest version of this dependency over there. It looks up that dependency. It looks up the sub-dependencies. It looks at our current project. It makes sure there's no conflicts. It downloads that dependency. It puts it in a predictable place, and it makes it easy for us to use via its autoloader. So these are all things that if we didn't have a tool for it, we would have to do manually, and we would be pretty darn miserable doing it. And, because during the development cycle of Drupal 8, there was the very clear decision that we wanted to use more open source code, we needed a way to manage that. And Composer is the de facto way of doing that for PHP. So again, I'm not going to go through, I think I don't think there's a whole lot of us here that are beginners with Composer. If there are, please tell me I'm wrong. Let me know, and I will go back. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the way I approach a new tool like Composer. One of the first things I like to do is I like to wrap my arms around it. I like to understand how big is the command set? Like, how many of these Composer commands are there? And with Composer, you can see them with Composer list. And if we just come over here, I've got this up and running. And you can see there's a few of them, and I can shrink the font size down, not to be able to read them, just be able to see the whole list at once. And so that's about all of them right there. But you can see even this list is kind of a cheat because there's 3 different commands to clear the cache, right? There's 2 different commands to dump the autoloader. There's 3 different commands for upgrading. So the list is actually shorter than this looks. And that, for some reason, whenever I do that and I start reading down the list, it gives me a little bit of comfort of knowing, okay, I know this one, I know this one, I know this one, and maybe I know 50%. But I like those commands that show me all the other commands. The last 4 are usually the ones that Drupal developers are most familiar with, right? Composer require to add a new dependency, including Drupal modules. Composer update to update a dependency. Composer remove to get rid of one, and Composer install to basically look at the manifest and install all of the dependencies. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But what we really want to focus on, and kind of the title of, or the subject of the talk is, taking the maximum advantage of this Drupal recommended project template. Before we talk about that, though, we need to go back in time just a little bit. And set the table for this. So since Drupal 8 was released, which was a few years ago now, actually this might be, is it 2016 or 2015? I think I have somewhere else that it was 2016. Someone feel free to correct me.
I think that's right.
It is 15, yes.
Oh my God, so I have it wrong in the other place. So, okay, Karen, I just saw your comment, and I hope to God I don't drive you away from my Badcamp workshop. So, because that's a full day of this. So, yeah. So since Drupal 8 was released, there's been this other template called the Drupal Composer Drupal Project template, not an official community project. It was just a bunch of community folks who got together and put it together and let it live and breathe and grow on GitHub. And it's still there, and it still works. And for a lot of us, that was the de facto best practice. When you started a Drupal 8 site, you started with the Drupal Composer Drupal Project, or often a flavor of that. I know Pantheon had a flavor of that Composer template. During the run-up, or not even the run-up, but during the Drupal 8 development cycle, post-release, some folks decided that this is really important. This template is really important, And as part of that template, there's a scaffolding plugin in there, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it was kind of realized this should be part of core. This shouldn't be some side project that lives out on GitHub. This should be something that we as a community take ownership of. So with Drupal 8.8, a little over a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, this year's, I think like most people, time this year has just got me all messed up. When Drupal 8.8 was released, with it came the new Drupal recommended project template, which is a fully formed, fully supported Drupal community core project. It's part of Drupal core. And this is kind of like the successor or the version 2.0 of the Drupal Composer Drupal project template. It's, in my opinion, it's more robust. It handles dependencies the right way, and we can talk about that a little bit. And its scaffolding plugin is much more performant and much more robust and much more flexible. So there's a lot of good things about this new template. And there's a couple differences as well. It's a little bit leaner than the old one. The old template included things like Drush as part of your code base. The new one doesn't include Drush. So if you want Drush as part of your code base, you have to do an additional composer require. It's little minor things like that, but differences nonetheless. So what does it include? A robust starting point, just like the old one. And by a robust starting point, it makes Drupal core, specifically this core recommended meta package, which I'm going to show you in a second, a dependency of the project. So a lot of us, when we were building Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 sites, we start the project, like literally start it by downloading a copy of Drupal from Drupal.org and renaming that folder to the name of our project, right? And that was like the beginning of our project. With the recommended project template, Drupal core is in a nested document root. So the outermost directory of your project is the name of your project, and then inside that is another directory for Drupal core. And what that lets you do is you point your www.acme.com at that nested doc root. Then anything above the doc root in that project directory is normally inaccessible from a browser. So you can put maintenance scripts and things like that, and even some documentation in that project root, which is a much more modern and handy way of doing things. The scaffolding tool is much more improved, and scaffolding are all those files in Drupal 8 outside of the core directory that belong to core. Things like update.php, index.php, .htaccess. These are all files that are part of Drupal core but don't live in that core directory. And we've all hopefully seen the way Composer works, that when you download a dependency, that dependency by default ends up in the vendor directory. With Composer installers, this is kind of the next bullet point, it might end up in the modules directory, but everything having to do with that dependency lives in one folder. Drupal core isn't like that, right? 95% of Drupal core is in the core directory, but there's a few files, a few stragglers outside. So we need something to handle those stragglers, those scaffolding files. And that's what the scaffolding plugin does. This new, more robust scaffolding plugin basically takes scaffolding files from inside the core directory and copies them to the appropriate place outside the core directory. And this is a bit more robust than the previous template. The previous template would basically phone home to Drupal.org and download all of these scaffolding files, which was a bit of a performance drain on Drupal.org. The other thing that the new scaffolding plugin does is it allows you to get involved in the process of these scaffolding files. If you don't want the readme.txt file, you can configure the scaffolding plugin to not copy that file out. If you want to modify your htaccess scaffolding file, you can configure the scaffolding plugin to do that. So it really allows you to better manage all your scaffolding files. I mean, how many of us have custom robots.txt files? And then every time we update Drupal core, we have to look at, have there been any changes to robots.txt? Yes, so I need to integrate my customizations into the new version and kind of do that little dance. You can get around all that now with the new scaffolding plugin. Another thing the template provides, and this is not something that's Drupal specific, it provides, it automatically includes this other plugin called Composer Installers. And that's what allows module dependencies to end up in the modules folder and not in the vendor folder. That's what allows custom, contrib themes to end up in themes/contrib instead of vendor. And again, that's not a Drupal specific bit of functionality, but it's something that we kind of get for free just by using this template. And probably one that if you're new to Composer, or if you're just if you use Composer just by rote, you may or may not realize is that by default, when you ask Composer for a new dependency, it's only going to look at packages.org. And, as a rule, generally Drupal modules do not live on, they are not listed on packages.org. But Composer is open source, and Composer allows you to configure it to look at other repositories. So as part of the Drupal recommended project template, there is, an entry that says, hey, in addition to packages, look over here at the Drupal repository. So let's take a look at, let's see, well, actually, you know what I'll do? Yeah, I'm going to do it here. github.com/Drupal/recommended project. Looks like I'm going there for the first time. I just switched to Firefox the other day. So, all right. So let's look at the latest 9.0.6 of Drupal core. Let's look, and I'll make this a lot bigger. Sorry about that. So let's just kind of take a quick tour of this recommended project template. I like to talk about these in 3 sections. So the first section I like to talk about is metadata. So this is just data about the project, information about the project. And normally when you start a new project using this template, I know the first thing that I do is I come in and I edit basically all of this stuff. I take ownership of it. I say, well, the name of my project is not Drupal recommended project. It's, Acme/website or something. So changing the name and the description, that's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to stop the template from working. This is, your project metadata. And, you can keep all of these keys if you want. You can get rid of them. There's actually additional keys that you can use if you go to the Composer, getcomposer.org. They have an authors key where you can list authors, and a README key where you can add a link to the README file and things like that. So we have metadata, which is pretty straightforward. This is actually the little bit of secret sauce that allows Composer to search for Drupal.org modules. So without these 5-6 lines of code, when we did a Composer required Drupal/path auto, Composer would come back and say, I don't know what you're talking about. This is what basically allows us to search Drupal.org as well. And you can actually add additional repositories to this. You can actually add, if you have a custom module that's in a private GitHub repository, for example, you can add that here, and then you could do a Composer require on your private repository. And that's something Karen will learn at Badcamp training in a few weeks. So there are 4 dependencies that we get out of the box. Core recommended, which is the meta package. I'm going to show you this in a second. This includes Drupal core. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here's that fancy scaffolding plugin I told you about. Here is the Composer Installers plugin. This is the one that allows us to put modules in the modules directory and stuff like that. And then this is just kind of like a nice to have core project message. All this little, this is actually a Composer plugin. All this does is at the end of a Composer create, it outputs a nice little welcome to the community message. So generally, the first thing I do when I start a new project is I will edit the metadata and remove this dependency. It's not necessary for anything else to work. It's just kind of a nice to have thing. And I'm going to go through the rest of these fairly quickly. The conflict area is basically is a list, is a deny list. It basically says if someone tries to do a Composer require on this dependency, Composer will say no. That's in the conflict list. So Arena's asking, this template is for any new project like module or theme, right? No, well, no, this is really just for a core project. If you're creating a new module, you probably wouldn't use this template. So this is really just for like as an end user for if you're building a Drupal site. These two configurations kind of go in handy, not handy, they go in tandem and they're handy. Two separate things there. Basically what this says is when you ask for dependency, it's going to try and give you a stable release, right? So thank you, Mark Handem. That's what we should trademark that. It's the name of my new company, Handem. It basically says when you do Composer require, it's going to give you the latest stable release. But what if there isn't a stable release? As we've all seen in various points in the Drupal 8 development cycle, there are still some modules out there that do not have releases. They might be on like beta 6, and they've been at beta 6 for years. Well, that's where this minimum stability comes in. This says, hey, give me the latest stable if there is one. But if there isn't a stable release, I will take anything as low as a dev version, which is, the lowest in the pecking order. So depending on your project, you might want to tweak these values. Now, even if you tweak them, you're never really stopped from installing anything. You can always get around this stuff by explicitly saying you want a beta version. But this is just kind of if you're doing a Composer require vendor/name and that's it, then these rules will be followed. Dev, beta, alpha, you have alpha and beta transposed there, Mark, in the chat, right? Yeah, okay. Config, this is like the preferences area. If you open up pretty much any desktop app, you're gonna have, preferences. Well, Composer has preferences as well. And there's only one that we get with the template that's set, and this is sort packages. And Jennifer, I see her, give me 1 second. All sort packages does is when you add a new dependency, it puts it in this list alphabetically. That's all it does. It just keeps this list in alphabetical order, which is a nice thing when you have 45 dependencies to look at them alphabetically. Jennifer, what's your question?
Question about if you're installing something with Composer and you are saying you need a stable version and it has to be dev and it doesn't find that, it's going to give you an error and then you can override. I'm a little new to Composer still, so.
So yeah, I'm not sure if you're asking.
It's going to stop the build, basically, is what I'm asking, I think.
Yeah, it will. Yeah, if you try to install something with these settings,
Mm-hmm.
if you try to install something that doesn't have a stable release, generally these will not stop you. This is the minimum, if you have this set to like beta and there is no beta version, there's only an alpha version, then it will stop you and say there's nothing to install or update.
Gotcha. So it'll just tell you that there's nothing to install.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
These are pretty loose settings. This will let a lot of stuff through.
Okay, that makes sense.
And
Thank you.
Hussein, okay, no problem. Hussein, did I say, let me see, does not let you add modules below this stability. Right, yeah, no, I think I'm saying the same thing as you, Hussein, right?
Okay. No, maybe I got confused, with with the way you said it earlier. So if I remember correctly, if you set minimum stability to, let's say, RC,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot even request a beta release, but I could be wrong there. I've seen that message often. So, maybe I'm confused. Maybe
okay.
it's only for dependencies. So if you say minimum stability as, let's say, RC or stable, you can't require a release which is like at beta. But I'll double check to be sure,
Oh,
yeah.
all right, we can test that later.
Yeah.
Because now I'm not sure either, now that you ask it that way. So if we have time, remind me and we'll circle back to that. But the bottom line, this is a pretty loose setting and generally won't stop you from installing anything. I think that's fair to say. All right, the extra section, and this is generally, usually this can be a fairly sizable section. And I have a little bit, I wish it was named better. The naming in the extra section, I think, makes things more confusing than they need to be. So the extra section is basically data that can be used by plugins generally. So these are, let's talk about Composer plugin real quick. A Composer plugin is to Composer as a Drupal module is to Drupal, as a plugin, a WordPress plugin is to WordPress, meaning it extends the functionality of Composer. So, Composer installers is not something that's going to be used by Drupal when you're, hitting a page on your site. Just like core Composer scaffold, this is never going to be involved in serving up a page. But these are tools that come into play when Composer is doing things. And it's often necessary to provide them with some information about your environment. So that's what the extra section generally is. Within the extra section, there's these top level keys. And this is where again, this is like playing Monday morning quarterback, so I understand that. This Drupal core Composer scaffold plugin can basically define any top level key in extra it wants. So in this case, Drupal-scaffold is data that is going to be read by core Composer scaffold. So if it was up to me, if I was in charge, I would change it so this had to be the same as this, because I think it would make things a lot less confusing. But so whenever you use a plugin, you have to make sure you pay attention to the documentation and understand that, okay, when you use this plugin, this needs data in a section with the key of Drupal-scaffold. So in this case, what is this data? This data basically defines the location of the web root. So if you want to build your code base, so your nested doc root is in a directory called docroot, D-O-C-W-O-O-T. I think I just spelled docroot, didn't I? D-O-C-R-O-O-T. Then you would change this from web to docroot. So this is like the kind of variable that, this data is going to be passed into this for when this runs. Installer paths is the extra key for Composer installers. And this is the little magic plugin that basically says, hey, if you are installing a dependency that has type Drupal module and it's composer.json, make sure that ends up here in this directory. So this Composer, this recommended project template basically provides all of these installer paths based on different types. And again, you can modify these paths. Again, if you want to use docroot instead of web, just go in and change all these things to docroot. If you want to put your modules in web/module/contribution or contributed, then you could change this. So you have complete control over your code base, when this happens. You can even write a custom module and in its composer.json, give it a type of this. And as long as you are requiring that dependency via Composer, it will end up in the custom directory. And then the final bit in the extra section is just for that Drupal core project message. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you on this little tour is this meta package of Drupal core recommended. So if we come up here and dive into this a little bit, and I'm going to come into tags, latest version of Drupal core. You notice this is a dependency, and there's no code here. It's basically just a composer.json file. It is a meta package. And a meta package is defined as basically, I like to call it a bucket full of dependencies. So this is a meta package that basically includes, oh, thank you, Hussein. Thank you for checking that out. I appreciate that. So remember, this is for specifically Drupal 9.0.6, and this meta package includes Drupal core 9.0.6, as well as all of Drupal core's dependencies. And now I'd like to show this because I like to point out that notice every single one of these dependencies is locked to a particular version. And this was one of the big issues with the old template, the old Drupal project or Drupal Composer, Drupal Project template. The default configuration of the old template was that for a given version of Drupal core, the core dependencies were not pinned to a specific version. And while it usually didn't cause issues, there were a couple times where it did cause issues because someone installed Drupal 9.0.6, late in the release cycle, not late, but maybe a couple months after it was released. But by then there was maybe a new version of this thing. And I don't remember which dependencies caused the problems, but by the time that person installed it, this was on 2.1.18, and 2.1.18 basically ended up throwing a bug in Drupal core. So this is super important because, as we all know, every version of Drupal core has to pass every single automated test in order to be tagged a release. Well, if your dependencies can float, if they can get updated, then there's no guarantee that after the release of 9.0.6, that tests are going to pass a month from now, 2 months from now, if these things are allowed to float. So this solves the problem because this basically locks down every single dependency to the version that passes all the tests for a given version of core. Make sense? Okay, I'm gonna assume that's a yes. So so that's the baseline, right? That is what recommended project does for us. That's all the things it gets to us, like it gets for us in a nutshell. And we could do some demos. I'm gonna skip some of these. I've actually already done my install. So I have I've done the Composer install, or I'm sorry, I've done the Composer create project. So I've done this already just so we don't have to wait for that one. We can do require, update, remove, and I'm assuming most of you have seen that. But hopefully if you're new to, if you're new to kind of understanding how Composer works under the hood, hopefully you have a little bit better idea now of like when you actually do a require, by default, Composer wants to put this thing in the vendor directory, right? It wants to put it here. And we really need it. Oh, I don't have any contrib modules yet. We really need it in here. But now, hopefully with that little tour of the template, now you know that, well, it's that Composer installers plugin that basically says, hey, I'll just take you I'll take you through the process here, and I'll make the font size bigger here in a sec. But make this font size bigger, and I'm not going to go to the right version because I know it's here. Path Auto is declaring itself as a Drupal module. So when Composer, or more specifically, when Composer installers sees this line, go back here. When Composer installers sees that it's of this type, it knows to put it in this place, right? So if we do a Composer require Drupal / path auto, and this will go pretty quick. Not only does it get the dependencies, but it puts them in the right place. It doesn't put them in the vendor directory, and that's what Composer installers does for us. All right, so let's actually now start going above and beyond what the template gives us. And I've got a bunch of examples here, and we could take, I think, how long do I have, Amy June? Till the top of the hour, is that right? Oh, Amy June left.
Oh, no, I'm here. I just couldn't find my mute button. No, you can go a little bit further if you want.
Okay. Well, I'll just start plowing through these. And again, if I'm going too fast, just please slow me down. And Hussein, you gave away my big surprise. Thanks so much. So yeah, so I am using Composer too. There's a couple things I know that will not work, but holy cow, Composer 2 is so much faster. Holy cow. Faster, and the big, I think for a lot of people, the big thing with Composer 2 is going to be the memory footprint is so much smaller. I think the days, knock on wood, if you have, I don't have any wood near me, I have a glass desk right here, but knock on wood, the days of like running out of memory and running Composer commands may be behind us once Composer 2 is out. So thank you, Hussein, I appreciate it. All right, so here's one that I see, I would say in 50% of the clients that I work with from like a project coaching or training standpoint when it comes to Composer, and conflicts with PHP versions. As hopefully we all know, your development team, as well as your remote environments, should all be running the same version of PHP. Maybe not the exact version of PHP, but at least the minor version, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3. If there's any discrepancy, you could get bitten. And what I mean by that is dependencies can have PHP version requirements. So let's just take an example of, I'm a developer and I like to be cutting edge. So on my local, I'm running PHP 7.4. And my client, they're hosting a little bit older, they don't stay completely up to date. Maybe they're on 7.1, they're hosting. So here I am, I'm, Joe Cool developer, super modern. I want, the fastest of everything. So I'm using 7.4 and I'm doing Composer require and I'm getting all my dependencies and I push them up to their remote server and poof, things don't work anymore. Well, why? Well, Composer is a PHP program, right? Composer runs. It's written and it runs in PHP. So if I'm running PHP 7.4 on my local and I do a Composer require on my local and that dependency requires PHP 7.3 or better, all's good for my local, right? I'm running 7.4, so I can get that dependency, that version of that dependency, install it, and everything's great. But then I push that code up to the remote environment, or I pull it into the remote environment that's running PHP 7.1, and that code base contains a dependency that needs PHP 7.4. Bad things happen. And you end up with the, well, it works on my machine bug, which nobody likes. So the right way to fix this, the best way, the right way, best practice, is just to make sure everybody on the team and all the remote environments are using the same minor version of PHP. If you can't achieve that, or you don't have control over that, the next best thing is, you can actually add, and do I even have it in here? Oh, I don't have it in here. You can add a platform. It goes in your configuration section, I believe, of your template. You can add the platform version of PHP, and that can be 7.1, 7.2, 7.3. And then the version that's listed in the platform in your composer.json, that's what Composer will use to judge whether or not a dependency can be installed. It will not use whatever version you're using. It will use whatever version's listed in your composer.json. But honestly, in my opinion, that is, that's like the workaround you don't want to have to do, right? You want to have everybody on the same environment. But as much as I think folks who've been bitten by it learn from it very quickly, I still see it very often. No, Mark, here, let me show you. Get Composer. Actually, here, you know what? I have a better place for it. Just give me a second. So this is a document that if you take the course, the full day course at Badcamp, you'll get access to this document. That's a tease. PHP version, there you go. Make this a little bigger. Right here, Mark. This is what I'm talking about. So in the config section, you could set the platform version. This is basically saying this is the official version of PHP for this project. And therefore, this is the version with which dependencies will have to meet, regardless of what you're running locally, regardless of what the remote is running locally. So it's not, like, in my opinion, this is not a great solution. This is a workaround to the proper solution. You can also have, I mean, you can put a platform requirement as well. I'm sorry, PHP requirement in the require section.
Yeah, that's actually, what's the difference between the require one and the config one? Just,
I know that this is the one that is used when you're requiring a dependency. I think, when does this come in? I mean, you often see this when it comes to libraries and not projects. So I'm trying to think how this would affect a project.
I use it in projects as well. If I'm using, like I said, some of the cutting edge features,
Yeah.
I mark it that way, that, okay, this project, for this project, I'll need PHP so-and-so version. And by the way, Composer install will flag an error. So there are many build workflows, right? And maybe like I'm getting ahead of you over here.
No, that's
So,
fine. That's fine.
You know, like, so Composer install will usually throw an error if you're trying to install a dependency on an older PHP version.
Right.
But if you're building it for example, if you're building this project in a CI environment, that's probably not helpful in that case.
Right. Right. All right. Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
And there is this, some IDs also use this to type hint or raise errors. So if you're writing code, if you're saying require PHP 7.3, but if you're using 7.4 syntax, it'll warn you that you're using 7.4 syntax, but your Composer is marking it as 7.3, right? You know, where it will not work.
Does PHP Storm do that? Do you know?
Yes, it does
Oh,
that.
I did not. I was not aware of that. All right. So, yeah. So just put a button on this. Make sure, you know, do your best to get everybody on the team and the remote environments on the same minor version of PHP, and you will avoid, I would hope, most issues of this type. Here, let's do this one. So I actually have on GitHub, I really like this example, github.com/ultimike/private repo. Oh, I bet I'm not logged in here. Sorry. Sorry, I don't want to sign up. I want to sign in. I got two-factor. I got to go to my phone. I'm sorry. Sorry. Authenticator. Where's GitHub? 299050. Okay. There we go. All right. So I have this private repo up on GitHub. So just imagine this is like a custom module that I use maybe for different clients, but it's definitely private. And that's why when I tried to get to it as anonymous, I couldn't get to it. But let's say I want to include this. I want to require this. How could I do that? Well, it's ultimike/private repo. So if I just come over here and do a composer require ultimike/private repo, this is not on Packagist. So Composer is going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, there's no, you know, that we don't know what you're talking about. Well, what you can do with Composer, and this is something, as soon as I learned this, I started using it all the time. You could add a new repository. So let's come over here and I'm going to pico my composer.json. I'm going to come down to my list of repositories. Make sure I put my comment in there, and then I'm going to do all my back one. Sorry, I'm a stickler for indentation. There we go. Someone yell at me if you see a typo. All right, so what do we have here? So we have a different type of repository. This is a true Composer repository. So there's actually software you can run on a server to have your own Composer Packagist. So this is a different one. This is a version control system. So this is basically pointing at a VCS, add a Git repository. And the URL for that repository is basically the same as the Git clone URL for that. All right, so you add this. And I like showing GitHub for this example because there's some code, there's functionality in Composer that works really well with GitHub, as you're about to see. So this is still a private repo. So I somehow I shouldn't be able to get to this just by adding that because there's no authentication. And I haven't tested this with Composer 2, so everyone keep your fingers crossed. I know this works with Composer 1. I can always go back, but it basically says, hey, your GitHub credentials are required to get this. And then it gives us a URL where we can retrieve a token. And then it tells us where that token is going to be stored. So let's head on over here. Let's get the token. And you guys can all copy it because I'm just going to, and you can just select all defaults. You can copy if you want. I'm going to delete it in a minute, but there's our token. Copy it. Oops. Come back over here, hit paste, enter, token stored. And now I have sorry, I believe it's in custom. Custom. Oh, you know what? I forgot to create. Wait, where is it? Oh, you know what? No, it's there. It's just I didn't give it a type, so it's going to be in the vendor directory. It's just, I should have made it like a type Drupal custom module. That would have been something smart to do. I'm going to change that, but not right now. So if we come back over here and we look inside CD vendor ultimate private, there we go. Oh, I meant to do this. There you go. So that's a really super simple, fast way to include custom code as a Composer dependency.
So my question on that is how, so when you did that token, it stored it in your home directory, right?
Yes.
Your auth.json.
Yes.
How would you make it so that Pantheon can build that?
Yeah, it's all going to be about the permissions on that repository.
So in this case, you couldn't, but I'd have to make the permissions different.
Yeah, for this, the way I have this repository set up, right, it's private to me only right now. But there are different ways to handle this authentication. I actually have, we have a client who has a private GitLab. They self-host GitLab. And I believe what we do for that is we actually include the authentication info. Do we include it? Well, we actually include it as part of the repo, but it's in like the DDev, somewhere deep in the DDev directory, so it automatically gets pulled into the containers. So it doesn't exactly answer your question, Mike. Mark, I'm Mike, sorry. But there's different ways to authenticate against that.
Cool, thanks, Mark.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Showstopper using Composer 2, I believe Composer patches. Unless Hussein, you might know, is Composer patches, is that compatible yet?
Not yet. There is one last PR that's pending. It's just like a one-line change. I think
Right.
After that it should be fine. And I'm using it. I'm just trying out like a fun thing, Composer 2, PHP 8, and stuff. So it's working great. Like I said, there's just one open PR.
Yep. All right. Perfect. Okay. So another problem, or common area. Common problem area that folks have with the Composer is like, what happens when something like maybe not goes wrong, but you start getting like, you can't install this because there's a conflict, or you're trying to install something and it's telling you you can't, or there's nothing to install or update. I have, actually, no, you know what? I'm one ahead. So here, I'm going to go to this one, then I'll come back in a second. I have really had a lot of good luck over a long period of time now with these two commands, which again, I learned these, only because I was looking for them and I started reading like the Composer documentation. Composer why not is it's a fun little command. It's actually an alias for, I believe, the prohibits command, but why not is a much it makes a lot more sense. And basically it's Composer, why not? Meaning, why can't I update Twig, for example? So, this is a Drupal 8 site. It has Twig. Well, why can't I just go Composer, update Twig. Right? I should be able to, but nothing to install, update, or remove. But if I do a Composer outdated, I'll do, well, I can't do direct. I'll just do Composer outdated. Composer outdated is like the Drupal available updates page, but for all of your dependencies in your project, not just your Drupal modules or Drupal projects. So this, this covers basically all of our dependencies. And clearly this shows that Twig, I'm on 2.12.5. Why can't I go to 3.0.5? It's showing me there's an update. So, why, oops. It's showing there's an update, but when I try and update, it says there's nothing to install, update, or remove. That's, alias, yeah, they're baked in. Yeah, that's not, I'm not showing you any special sauce here, Bob. This is all stuff baked into Composer. So this is where Composer, why not, comes in. Compower. I make that typo fairly often. Composer, why not? Twig. And this is one of the best debugging tools I found. It tells you what's stopping you. What's stopping you from updating Twig? And this basically says, well, Drupal core 9.0.6, that requires this version constraint. So the tilde, basically, I'm sorry, I do this, again, this is something else I do all the time. I call a caret a tilde and a tilde a caret. And I'm sure I confuse a lot of people. So let me slow down, take a sip of water here, I'll get it right. In Composer version constraints, the caret locks the first digit. So what this version constraint is telling us is that any version in the 2.x branch is good. So Drupal core 9.0.6 is perfectly happy with any version of Twig as long as it's in the 2.x branch. Now, we don't know for sure if this is the last version in the 2.x branch. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But then there's another thing. There's another dependency that requires an exact version of Twig. So basically this thing right here, this dependency, and this is our meta package that we looked at, our meta package says, no, your version constraint is this, meaning there's no wiggle room. You must install this version. And that's why we can't update. Now, again, this is a very simple example. When you start installing Drush and Drupal console, you might end up with these weird, or actually it was the one I've seen lately, the GDPR module. The GDPR module, I don't know if there's a new release, but it actually requires an older version of Drush, which is crazy town for some reason. But I have found whenever I get like these wall of text dependency conflicts, can't update because this conflicts with that or whatever, the way I almost exclusively get out of it is with why not. And then also it's very similar, but sometimes again, Composer depends, Twig. It gives us the same information, but you can do it the other ways around. You can do Composer depends, Drupal/core, for example. And well, these are all core modules, but where are we? Yeah, these are all core modules. So that one's not actually, down here. So core recommended requires Drupal core. CTools requires this version of Drupal core. Path auto requires this version of Drupal core. And then the other thing you can do is you can do Composer show Drupal/core tree. And this will actually show you the dependency tree of Drupal core, which you can imagine this goes on for a while. But Drupal core depends on mastermind / HTML, which depends on this, which depends on that. So it's it's interesting to see it at the Drupal core level, but that command can help when you're kind of lower in the weeds. So why not and depends are two that I like very much. The other, thank you, Hussein, for the compliment. So let me put the one more thing on that. We talked about the caret locking the first digit. You might wonder what the difference is between the caret and the tilde. The tilde allows the last digit specified to move. So if we had, oops, tilde 2.12.0, the tilde basically means only the 0 is allowed to move. If we did tilde 2.12, then the 12 would be allowed to move. If we have caret 2.12.0, the 2 is locked. Both of these can move. If we have caret 2.12, same thing. This is allowed to move. So the way I remember it is the caret locks the first digit. The tilde allows the last digit specified to move. Tilde, I've never seen just tilde 2 like that. Normally you'll see tilde 2 dot something, which basically locks it to the 2.x branch mark. I don't think what you have there, tilde 2, yeah, okay, so what Hussein has, yeah, is that equivalent? I've never actually tested that.
Yeah,
But I trust
it's
Hussein.
kind of like an internal thing, yeah, in Composer.
Oh, okay.
That's how it passes versions. So if it's like, if you just say tilde 2, it's actually assumed to be tilde 2. But that's not the same as tilde 2.0.0. That has a different meaning.
Right, well, yeah, so tilde 2.0 is .0. Here, so we can do it like this. Tilde 2.0.0 is this, and I'm just going to type it out here, is the same as greater than or equal than 2.0.0, but less than 2.1.0. Right?
So there is this link I have put in chat, which is a nice visualization.
Yes.
If you want to test it out, it's a really nice visualization.
This is, yeah, it's a fantastic tool.
Yeah.
Yep. So you can come here and basically say, and I know that the contrast on that is horrible. Why can't I even 8.1? And it will like take away anything in red, is eligible with this. So if I do caret 8.0, that's basically, and I have stable here, so it's only looking for stable releases. So that's everything from 8.0 to 8.9.6. And if I put an extra O on that, nothing changes. But if I change that caret to a tilde, we only get 8.0 dot whatever. But if we get rid of that last .o, now we get all of those. Yep. Yeah, carets are what we get by default. When you just do, and here, I can actually show that to you. So let me get rid of some of these windows here. When we did Composer require path auto, or Composer require Drupal path auto, and we ran that a little while ago. This one, oh no, it's that one. That one right there. Notice we didn't give any version constraints, but look what Composer put inside of our Composer actually used the caret syntax. And I'm getting an echo all of a sudden, so I'm not sure. Someone has their mic open, I think. All right, so far so good? Perfect, okay. Yeah, so I talked about outdated. You can also do outdated direct. This is the one I actually use more. See, Mark? Composer, Compower, jeez. Outdated, can't spell. Composer.data.direct just shows you direct dependencies. So these are dependencies you specifically asked for, not sub-dependencies. So this will show us path auto, which there's no, I don't have any updates because it's a brand new site. So this is kind of boring. Let me come over here real quick. cd dot 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 de, no, oh, where am I? De, where am I? Oh, there we go. de8. There we go. Composer outdated direct. Oh, okay. I'm running Composer 2 here as well. You can see Composer patches is skipped. But this is actually running Composer outdated direct on DrupalEasy.com or my local repository. And so this will not show us all the Symfony stuff or the Twig stuff because those are sub-dependencies. These are basically going to show modules that I've installed and updates there. So this is very similar to the Drupal's available updates page, except that it also includes non-Drupal dependencies. So, okay, so we talked about that. We talked about that. Validate. So let's do a quick example of validate. So what does validate do? Validate does a couple of things. Pico, Composer, JSON. Let's come up here and I'm going to leave off this comma on purpose. And let's just say we're doing this DrupalEasy SF Doug is the name of the project. And I go in, I'm changing some metadata and I leave off a comma, at the end of name here. Now, sure, I could go and try to run some other Composer command and Composer is going to bark at me. But Composer validate does two things. Number one, it's going to check syntax. So it's very fast, obviously. It's not doing anything else. It's basically telling us, hey, you've got a JSON issue. All right, cool. I respect that. I'll fix that. So now if we do Composer validate, we get that it's valid. So that's good. We don't have any more syntax issues, but we get this weird message. So I'm going to talk about this just for a moment or two. This normally, well, it could lead to a much deeper discussion, which we're not going to have time for tonight, but I do like to mention it during this because I think it's important. So I don't often venture into the composer.lockfile, but let's do that for a second. So basically it's telling us the lock file, our composer.lock file is not up to date with the latest changes in composer.json. So again, just as a review, what's the composer.lock file? It's generally not something we ever need to edit. And basically what it contains is it contains detailed information about every dependency installed in the project. Not just direct dependencies, all dependencies. And not only like the name of the dependency, but also the exact version that was installed. And then a bunch of metadata about it, requirements and blah, 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 and all kinds of stuff. And I mean, let's just find another one down here. What's this one? This looks like Drupal core I stumbled upon. Yeah, look at that. So Drupal core and all that stuff. But at the very top, there's this thing, content hash. And this is interesting because this is a calculated value. And this is based on not only the contents of this file, but also the contents of the composer.json file. So anytime that you make a manual modification to the composer.json file, and not in every single section, but I'm going to call them quote unquote important sections, name, require, extra section, stuff like that. Anytime there's a change in a certain list, in a certain number of sections in your composer.json, this hash value needs to be recalculated. Meaning this hash value is the result of a calculation that includes, information from the composer.lock as well as information from your composer.json file. Oops, there we go. So when we made a change, when we change this, I can tell you that the name key, this is one of the things that goes into the hash calculation. So when we change this and we don't change the composer.lock, that results in Well, I don't have to show it again. This message, the lock file is not up to date. Well, how do we get it up to date? We have to recalculate a new version of that hash. That's what composer update -- lock does. When you do a composer update with -- lock, it doesn't update any of your dependencies. It basically validates your composer.json file and calculates a new value of that hash. So real quick, just to demonstrate, this one begins with 848. That should be remembered. That should be easy to remember. 848. If I do a composer update -- lock, basically it's going to recalculate. It's going to look at my composer.json, look at my composer.lock, and recalculate that value. And I have a point to all this, by the way, as well. And notice it's now D59. Okay, so why is that important? Well, another thing that causes that content hash to change is the addition or the removal of a dependency. So consider the situation where you have two divergent branches of code, right? You have branch A and branch B. Someone's working on branch A and they've added 2 dependencies. You're working on branch B and you've added a different dependency. Well, at the tip of branch A, that has one content hash. At the tip of branch B, that has a different content hash. Both content hashes based on the contents of the composer.lock and the composer.json file of their individual branches. Well, what happens when you go try and merge? Which of those 2 content hashes is correct? Neither. So that content hash will, when you have 2 divergent branches of code where both branches have made changes, significant changes to the composer.json or composer.lock file, you are guaranteed to have a code conflict in composer.lock, because the content hash in branch A is not the right one, and the content hash in branch B is not the right one. After merge, there has to be a new value that's based on all of the dependencies from both branches. So I know, like probably most folks, you hit that. I see Bob has hit that. That drove me nuts until I understood what was going on. So once you understand what's going on, basically, whether you're doing a rebase or a merge, what's the solution? The best way to correct conflicts. Yeah, I'm about to tell you, Bob. Thanks for the segue. Appreciate it. Regardless of if you're doing a rebase or a merge, if you have a conflict in composer.lock, check one out. Either check out -- ours or check out -- theirs. And who was it? Karen, who's taking my class at Bad Camp? We're going to do this in class as well. So there you go. There's another reason to attend the full Bad Camp class. Check out one or the other. It doesn't matter. And then just do composer update -- lock. That will calculate that new unknown value. And then you can add your composer.lock, resolve the conflict, and do a git rebase -- continue or complete the merge, whichever one you're doing. But I like to mention it, especially since we have extra time. I'm not limited to 45 minutes, obviously. It's just good to know like why. Like for me, that's like 80% of the battle. Just understand like why the hell that happens. And once you understand why that happens, it becomes a lot easier to know what the solution is. That makes sense? Yep. Okay. How many more of these? How many more do I have left? I don't want to overstay my welcome. Let's say that one. We got this one. Yeah, I don't have to do a demo of this one. We were talking about this earlier, but let's say you want a beta or a release candidate. What's the syntax? Well, in your require something like this, caret 1.0 at beta. This will give you the latest beta. You can also do -dev. Just note that when you're using -dev, you get a cloned version of the dependency. Most of the time, it gets downloaded, right? Not cloned. If you're not committing dependencies to your repo, normally not a problem. If you are committing dependencies to your repo, could be a problem because Git wants to treat a repository inside of a repository as a submodule. So you have to kind of, there's a couple of ways to work around that. You know, the manual way is just delete the .git directory from the clone dependency. Not the best way of doing it. It's not a bad idea, yeah. I'll just make t-shirts. What I'll do. There's actually, I wrote a blog post. So here, I'll point to this blog post. DrupalEasy Composer plugins. So here, I'll throw this link in the chat if anybody wants it. So where is it? Yeah, so this one, I'll make this a little bigger. This dependency, top floor, composer, cleanup, VCS directories. This is really, you only need this if you're committing dependencies to your repo, right? But all this does is it just automatically removes those .git directories. So you don't have to do it manually. So. I agree with Hussein on that for sure. There's actually a way, and I think I have it in the handout. I just discovered this not too long ago. This fun little syntax. You can specify a specific beta release with this syntax. So if you don't want beta 3, but you want beta 2, there's actually a syntax for that. So just be aware that these version constraints are very flexible and you can do a lot with them. Okay, I think I'm going to skip Composer patches. Number one, it doesn't work well. I can switch to Composer 1 pretty easily, but this is if you've ever had to patch, especially with pre-Drupal 8, if you've had to patch a contrib module or core or something like that, keeping those patches, through module updates and stuff can be kind of a pain. And this is also in the same, I talked about this here as well. It's one of the must-haves. But this Composer plugin, again, Composer plugin extends the functionality of Composer. This basically allows you to specify patches in your composer.json, and Composer will automatically reapply them for you. And if for some reason they don't apply, Composer will tell you. And then you might have to re-roll a new patch, or maybe you just have to link to an updated patch, or maybe the patch has been committed and is part of the release and you don't need it anymore. So super handy. I use this on most of my sites, and it really lowers the barrier of having to, you don't have to be scared about applying a patch anymore. As long as you've reviewed the patch and you know what it's doing and it's not, you're not opening up any security issues, it really just makes it, almost pleasant. And it's kind of fun the first time you see it work. You're like, oh my God, that's so much better than the old way. Scaffolding files. So yeah, so let's do I have them? Let's see. No, let's see, that's awesome. Yeah. So let's do a very simple scaffolding example. So as we talked about earlier, in the web directory, basically everything outside of the core directory, these are all scaffolding files. So something like the readme.txt file, really, you don't need it on a production site. It's almost a negative, right? Because it makes it easier for would-be attackers to identify what CMS is being run. So there's a lot of good arguments for not having this on production, not having this on production. If you don't need web config, don't have that. Some people even get rid of, update, until they need it or, whatever. So let's just do a quick example of, not having the readme.txt file scaffolded every time. So we can do a quick thing here. Let's just do an RM on it, rm web/readme. So let's get rid of it first, right? So it's not there anymore. And if we just did a composer, can I trigger it? I don't even know if I can trigger it. Let's see, try it. Drupal path. I just want to trigger the scaffolding plugin. Yeah. So just even an update that doesn't update anything, it recreates that README. It copied it. This is a directory inside the core directory, but that README file is back. It's like the undead, right? Even if you delete it, it's gonna, the scaffolding plugin is gonna be like, it's supposed to be there. You got to put it there. So what we can do is let's kill it again, and let's pico our composer.json, and down here in the extra, remember the Drupal scaffold key is for the Drupal core scaffolding plugin, and I'm going to cheat here and just come grab my code. Scaffolding files. I just got a little snippet of code I'm going to grab here. There we go. Boom. And this is all very well documented in the scaffolding plugin documentation. We can come over here and drop that in, and you can add a file mapping section. And this basically allows you to customize, file mapping. So what this is basically saying is create this file from nothing, meaning don't create this file. And there's other things, but you can do like appends, prepends, or patching as well. But this is a very simple example of just saying, don't create this file. So if we do that, and again, it doesn't exist because I manually deleted it, but now in the future, as you run Composer, it will not get recreated. So again, this is like one of those 2-second things that once you see it, you're like, oh, well, I'm going to add that to all of my sites, right? Because I certainly don't need install. I certainly don't need README. So yeah, so Hussein is basically saying, I was trying to avoid using that. You can actually call the scaffolding command directly, composer Drupal : So this is like the direct way of calling it, and it's not going to do anything there. Okay, what's this last one? Yeah, and then of course, I didn't do it, but normally the first thing I do for a new project is I do a composer remove Drupal, and I always forget the name of it. It's core project message, I think, right? Project. So I always remove that one that I don't use. That gets rid of it. And then composer require. And here's an example of why I do that. Because the version of Drush, for example, that comes with DDev, this is like globally installed in a DDev container. It's 8.3.5. Composer, can't spell still. Composer require Drupal, I'm sorry, Drush/Drush. Yes, John, I updated Composer 2 inside of DDev specifically for this presentation. I'll show you how I did it. So that's pretty fast, right? That was pretty fast for Drush. So now if you do Drush -- version, now it's using the latest. And if you want to try the Composer 2, it's ridiculously easy. Inside of DDev, you have to do a sudo. But if you're not inside of DDev, Composer self update -- preview. This will get you to Composer 2. And then to go back, I always have to look it up. Anybody know off the top of their head? Composer self update.
Rollback.
Rollback, thank you. So actually, I need to use sudo composer self update -- rollback. Yep. So now I'm rolled back to 1.10.9. But if you change that to preview, so I mean it's crazy easy to test Composer 2.0. So yeah, so to answer John's question, if I were to restart this container, it would go back to 1.10.9. So before we started today, I made sure it was up to date now. All right. Yeah, Composer 2. There you go. We've talked about it enough. That's me. And are there any questions? Or any additional questions, I should say. Hussein, I will have you as my wingman anytime, by the way. Every president, you always help me out.
Thank you.
I see your name there. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm good. I got my safety blanket. I think I owe you a nice meal next time we're allowed to be in the same city.
Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
don't forget to take him up on that, by the way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Knock wood.
All right. Oh, good to hear that, Mike. I'm glad. I learned enough from you. So, all right. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. And you make sure to tell all the bad camp organizers that, you know, mine is the best one. It's very important that they know that, especially Amy June.
I can't hear. I can't hear it.
Ah, yeah, of course not.
He
But I
can't.
didn't miss any questions. Did I?
La 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 la.
All right. I don't think I missed any questions, did I? In the chat?
No, I think you answered them as they came.
All right. Any thoughts on Lando versus DDev? No, I mean, they're both fantastic tools. You know, for anybody who listened, you know, I exercised them both a couple of years ago. I chose DDev because at the
DDev
time,
sponsors Florida Drupal Camp.
yes, number one, they're a very generous sponsor. At the time, you know, their support was quite a bit better than Lando. And I felt they were easier to get up and running if you're new to Docker-based tools. And I do a lot of teaching to people who have never used Docker before. So that was very important to me. These days, if I was, you know, if I didn't have to teach, I'd probably use Lando. Lando's a lot more flexible, I think. But I still got to say that the DDev developers they're very responsive. Their support is, you know, if you have a question, you can get it answered in often a matter of minutes, you know, in the Slack channel. So yeah, they're both, I mean, I have nothing bad to say about either tool. We are, you know, I look back, I think back to a few years ago when like front end tools really matured and all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, it's like poof, there's all these front end tools. I feel like we're in the middle of that for development environments. You know, we've got really good local developments. We have multiple local development environments to choose from, which is great from just a consumer competition standpoint. And now we're starting to see like these remote development environments. You know, that remote, what's that, the VS Code, hosted VS Code, whatever it is, that blows my mind when I see stuff like that. So like we're in the middle of like some really exciting times and we are the beneficiaries of that because we have so many great local tools to choose from. Oh, hey, Mike, how are you? I didn't even see you there. Oh, there you are. I recognize there's your last name full of vowels. I see it now.
Gee, thanks.
Good to see you. Well, good to see your name at least.
Nice to see you, man.
All right, good. All right, I think I'm all set, Amy June. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Much appreciated, as always.
I'm gonna stop the recording.